As a news station, KHQ8 usually does not report suicides on the air. The reason, we don't want it to be seen as an answer to somebody's problem or even provoke copycats. Well, with at least 4 teenage suicides in the tri-states in the last year, we thought maybe it's time to start a conversation. KHQ8's Chad Douglas kicks off a 5-part series this morning called Shattering the Silence.
Well, it seems nobody likes to talk about suicide, and really that's part of the problem. Nobody talks about it until it's too late. Half the battle in tackling a problem is first realizing there is one.
He was a great kid.
She was really funny.
He was the class clown.
She loved music. She loved friends.
He always wanted to help others.
Great memories of friends and loved ones. Unfortunately, that's all that's left of Dylan Muldoon and Hannah Wathan memories. May 19th, 2015, 2 days before high school graduation, this Hannibal High senior took her own life. 6 months later, Quincy Senior High student Dylan Muldoon met the same fate. 2 different teenagers in different cities with different circumstances, but the same outcome, suicide.
This is not the rest of your life. You know, this is not a good experience right now. You will get past this.
Dr. Jessica Patel is a certified clinical psychologist with Quincy Medical Group. She says the #1 weapon in preventing suicide, talking about it.
Anytime anyone makes a comment regarding possible what we call suicidal ideation or suicidal thoughts, it needs to be taken seriously.
Even if it's said in a joking manner, human brains don't fully mature until about 25 years old, so for kids, joking about suicide could be a call for help or a way for them to test the waters, so to speak. If someone says something like this to you, take it seriously and ask more questions.
I would ask them what the thoughts are, you know, what's going on, how they're feeling. Honestly, as a professional, the next question that we ask is, do they have a plan?
If they do, you should call 911 or take them straight to the emergency room. If there is no definite plan, that person still needs to see a doctor. You can start with your general practitioner. Part of the issue is also the stigma that's associated with mental health.
Mental health is not something bad. If I had diabetes, I would be getting help. I would go to the hospital, I would go to a clinician and get help. The same is for mental health, you know, but there's this stigma behind it that you're crazy.
Dr. Patel says at least 1 in 3 people have some sort of mental illness. Now, there's nothing to be ashamed of in seeking help. She also adds that if you've had treatment for mental illness, you can be a big asset to helping others if you share your story. And start young. She says instilling coping mechanisms in kids as young as preschool will help them as they grow and develop into teenagers and adults.
Dr. Jessica Patel says she's done suicide risk assessments on kids as young as 6. She also says when seeking professional help, you need to make sure the therapist is trained in cognitive behavioral therapy or dialectical behavioral therapy. She says those 2 therapies have the best long-term outcomes. If you're not sure if your mental health professional is trained in those therapies, simply ask.
And we've also got another final tip from Dr. Patel this morning. She says one of the first predictors of suicidal behavior is the feeling of hopelessness. If they're not talking about the future, that should be concerning. And she adds many times people might not be willing to come to you, so you have to ask about them. Now, if you see something different in a friend or a family member, start the conversation yourself. For some reason, there's a stigma against seeking mental health in the United States. And according to the American Society for Suicide Prevention, get this, more Americans kill themselves every year than the entire population of Quincy. KHQA's Chad Douglas continues his special report, Shattering the Silence, this morning with one Quincy family's story of suicide.
18-year-old Dylan Muldoon was explained to me as the class clown, always wanting to make others laugh. In fact, one person told me he would get in your face, would not leave you alone until you smiled. Well, sadly, down deep inside, Dylan wasn't smiling at all, but was in a very dark place few people journey. Sadly, his journey ended November 6th, 2015.
If he would have just paused, just taken that extra second and not pulled that trigger.
Dawn Whitcomb is Dylan Muldoon's mother.
Dylan was my only child, and I won't have the graduation, and I won't have a wedding, and I won't have grandchildren.
What she does have are memories of her son, memories that make her smile.
He was kind, he was compassionate. He always wanted to help others.
And he is still helping others with Dawn's help. She has now helped start a program at Quincy Senior High School. The committee is set to get a permanent initiative at the school. She says there are DARE programs, sex ed requirements. Why not have a suicide prevention program?
If we can help just one kid to just stop and think before they try to do anything to themselves, that's all that matters to me.
Dawn tells me she knew Dylan struggled. She says she began noticing changes when Dylan was in about the 7th grade. He had been hospitalized, he was in therapy, and was on medication. However, Dylan and Dawn weren't that open about the struggles with anyone else.
I think the bottom line, though, is, when people do feel like that and, are feeling those feelings, they just want to be heard. They just want somebody to listen to them, not to say, well, you need to do this or you need to do that, but just to sit back and listen.
Now, when the school year starts up in the fall, that committee that Dawn helped start is kicking off Suicide Prevention Week. National speakers are coming in from Project Semicolon and No Stigmas to talk to students and then give them a chance to do personal breakout sessions. Now, tomorrow morning, we're going to introduce you to another family who is dealing with losing a loved one. This student had no warning signs and zero history of mental illness.
Yeah, and for more information on suicide prevention, including a suicide hotline, just log on to khqa.com. Well, in a matter of weeks, a Hannibal family will have an anniversary, and it won't be one to necessarily celebrate, but the family knows it's coming and it's going to be rough. KHQA's Chad Douglas has more on this story as we continue our series, Shattering the Silence.
May 19th, 2015, Hannibal High School senior Hannah Wathan was 2 days away from graduation. In the fall, she was set to go to medical school. Her family tells me she loved helping people. Her family and friends were devastated to find out with absolutely no warning on a Tuesday morning, Hannah had taken her own life.
Before they took her body from the house. I said to her that it wasn't that bad. Nothing was ever that bad.
11 months after burying the youngest of 3 daughters, Bob Wathan looks at life differently these days. He doesn't sweat the small stuff, but he doesn't take the time he's given for granted. His entire family now knows the value of time. Wathan's daughter Hannah had gotten into a little bit of trouble during a senior graduation tradition. Hannah wasn't a troublemaker, and when she got caught drinking, she took it hard.
In her mind, she felt like she had messed up.
Hannah's parents sat her down on the couch in the early morning hours of May 19th to talk about what had happened. Bob tells me it wasn't a heated discussion, it was just talking. They went to bed thinking the conversation would continue the next day. That conversation would never happen because Hannah committed suicide after her parents left for work that day.
One of the things you're going to hear from us, Chad, repeatedly is that there is nothing that can't be fixed. This is not a solution for anything, and for whatever reason, she got up the next morning and thought her future was ruined.
There's nothing that you can do that is not redeemable.
The Wathans tell me they're doing as well as anybody could be following a suicide. The family unit is tighter than it was before, and they give a lot of credit to their healing, to their faith. One of Hannah's older sisters, Stephanie, told me she had actually been an atheist for about 3 years before Hannah's death. In fact, she says she was saved 2 months before Hannah died. She also shared with me that Hannah's suicide was not the family's first bout.
The moment that I was contemplating suicide, I remember, and I told myself, I don't ever want to forget how alone I feel in this moment. And I thought about my kids, and I thought about the effect it would have on my boys, and I didn't want anyone else raising them. But it was at that moment when I felt so alone that for the first time in years, I said, okay, if there's anything else out there, God, if you're real, now's the time to show me because I need you. And that's the point where he came in, and I thank God for that low every day. I guess if I have any advice, it's when you get to that low, don't see that as your final destination. When you're down that low, look up.
For Hannah's sister, Stephanie, May 19th was like any other day. She had seen her sister the night before and talked about graduating and going off to college.
Our world stopped, and we're confused, and we're trying to figure out how to move forward. But when you think about it, when I think about her, I mean, there's no words for how much I miss her.
Especially since Hannah has 2 nieces and 2 nephews who won't remember her.
Our babies are growing up without their aunt, and I mean, Hannah was a cool aunt.
Just 2 days after Hannah's funeral, Hannah's sister Christina and her husband found out some good news. After battling infertility issues, she found out she was pregnant with their second daughter.
Hannah's middle name was Elizabeth, and that's our daughter's first name. We named her Elizabeth.
Nice.
We call her Lizzie.
Now, during my time with the Wathan family, they told me faith has been a huge part of their healing. So too has a scholarship that has now been set up in Hannah's memory. This graduation, 2 Hannibal seniors who are going into the medical field will each get $1,000. The Wathans say they thought maybe they'd get enough money for the scholarship to last a couple of years. Turns out they have enough to last at least 10 years.
Wow. And we continue this conversation tomorrow morning. Be sure to tune in on KHQA this morning as we talk with a suicide survivor. She shares her story for you so others don't have to walk her same path.
You can learn a lot from walking a mile in someone else's shoes. The longer the walk, the more you can learn. This morning, we take a journey in someone's shoes that's not going to be a very pleasant walk, but we think it has to be heard. We continue our special series, Shatter the Silence, now by introducing you to Stephanie Norris, a 5-time survivor of suicide.
I am bipolar.
This is what can help prevent suicide. Dr. Jessica Patel, a certified clinical psychologist with Quincy Medical Group, says the stigma against mental illness is getting better, but there is still a long way to go.
If you've gotten mental health services and someone comes to you, sharing your own experiences with them and normalizing that experience is huge.
Stephanie Norris agrees. That's why she wanted to do this interview.
Speaking out and helping others, so I mean, I guess to a point where I'm comfortable with what I've done and how it's affected me.
Stephanie began struggling with mental illness and suicidal thoughts a couple of years ago. Her last attempt was more than 6 months ago.
How are you doing now?
I'm doing a lot better than I have been in the past. I'm going to therapy. I'm on medication for everything.
Stephanie talked to me about what it's like to be in her dark place.
And that dark place that you are in is beyond the scariest place that I have ever been in my life. Once you get down there that low and you feel like that's the only answer, you don't think about anything else. You only think about getting that relief from that dark place that you're in.
She also talks about being hospitalized for her mental illness. She said it helped in a huge way and wants to spread the word that treatment for mental illness is nothing to be ashamed of.
It's not a bad place. It's actually pretty fun. They make it fun. They know that you don't want to be there. They're trained to help you out.
As Stephanie says, her outlook on life now is much more positive. She offers this advice. If you feel like you're in that dark place, she says, just reach out, say something to somebody and get help. She says no one is ever truly alone. And actually, every family I've talked to for this series says pretty much the same thing. Suicide is a permanent fix to a temporary problem. Tomorrow morning, I'll show you what's left behind for the family after a loved one commits suicide.
We wrap up our week-long series on suicide prevention today with a look at what's left behind for the family. Here's KHQA's Chad Douglas.
The families we've showcased this week have opened their hearts to share their stories on suicide prevention. The interviews we conducted were tough. Together, we relived easily the worst day of their life. All of them told me suicide is a long-term fix to a short-term problem. We give you this final piece this morning to show you what's now left behind for the family after a loved one has taken their own life.
She's forever changed because of the decisions that I have made. I don't think she's ever going to be the same again.
Stephanie Norris is a suicide survivor. She's talking about her younger sister who's now changed. Changed because she saw her older sister on her deathbed. Stephanie is also changed. She's attempted suicide 5 times and now has a different look on her life. Luckily, these 2 sisters can take this change and move forward.
Our babies are growing up without their aunt.
For sisters Christina Merrill and Stephanie Wathan, it's a different story. Their youngest sister, Hannah, took her own life 11 months ago.
The missing and the hurting doesn't just branch out to the loss of Hannah. I hurt for my family. I hurt for her friends. It reaches to so many areas.
I don't think if she would have thought it through, she couldn't have thought about how much it would hurt her family and her friends.
A common theme among these families: problems can be fixed no matter how big. Death is permanent. 18-year-old Dylan Muldoon suffered with mental illness for years and took his own life in November of 2015. His mother, Dawn Whitcomb.
Wow, what have I learned? I've learned that you need to take every life in your life not for granted. That one day we could be here, and we're not.
Now Whitcomb suffers from guilt and PTSD because she's the one who found Dylan after he shot himself. She does go to a support group and is adjusting to life without her son.
Dylan was my only child, and I won't have the graduation, and I won't have a wedding, and I won't have grandchildren.
All because of a split-second decision made at the hands of a teenager. Whitcomb says the pain never goes away. The Wathans reinforce that.
There will always be somebody that misses you. I think in the moment when you're contemplating suicide, you feel alone, and that can tend to be what pushes you forward. You're never that alone. There's somebody that will miss you and that loves you.
They're robbing us of things, you know. I don't get to walk down the aisle. I don't get to have that daddy-daughter dance. I don't get to see a young man look into her eyes and she is his world. I don't get to see that because she wasn't thinking of those things. She couldn't see past this, and it's what I want people to realize, to think of those things and to look past the moment. Nothing's that bad.
I just want to thank these families for being so open and so honest and willing to share their stories. If you've missed any of this 5-part series and want more information, including resources about suicide prevention, including the suicide hotline there at the bottom of your screen, everything is at khqa.com.